This was not a thorough investigation, in my opinion. The people involved were not questioned at all.
The Indiana Fever and the people who run this league just watched an arena go half empty for a Caitlin Clark home game. And the most revealing part of this entire story is not the empty seats themselves, it is the absolute deafening silence from the people who should be screaming about it. Nate Tibbetts, the Phoenix Mercury's general manager, stepped in front of a microphone this week and delivered one of the most baffling, tone-deaf public statements this league has produced in years. Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever's head coach, has been put in a position where her own fan base is voting with their feet. And the WNBA front office, the establishment that has spent 2 full years benefiting from the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, is watching the Golden Goose get cooked in real time and responding with bureaucratic nonsense about protocol and process. Welcome back, this is CORTLEA, and today we are documenting the moment the Indiana Fever's front office, the league office, and one of the most tone-deaf general managers in professional basketball all collided in a single catastrophic news cycle, while Caitlin Clark, the only reason any of this matters commercially, signed autographs in front of a half-empty arena and refused to let the people down, even when the people running this league clearly have.
Reeve and Becky Hammon, the goal is to clean up our game, but I do think it's important not to rely.
Let me give you the full picture of what we are actually dealing with here, because the conversation that TV refuses to have is the one that explains everything you are about to see. The Indiana Fever played a home game against the Los Angeles Sparks. The Sparks, for context, are a team that has been stripped down to its absolute bones. No Kelsey Plum, no Cameron Brink, a roster that even the most charitable analysts in this league would describe as rebuilding at best. This was supposed to be a layup. This was supposed to be the kind of game where you sell out a building on the strength of Caitlin Clark's name alone, run up the score, and give the fans a comfortable, enjoyable evening. The Fever won. Kelsey Mitchell reportedly had 26 points. The game itself was not the issue. The issue is what the building looked like when the game was played. 5 minutes before tip-off, the photos coming out of that arena told a story that no press release, no carefully worded statement from the league office, and no amount of spin from Stephanie White's media team could explain away. The upper deck was completely empty, not sparse, completely empty. Entire sections on the lower level, gone. You could see the color of the seats more clearly than you could see the faces of the fans sitting in them. This was a home game, against the worst team in the league, with the most marketable player in the history of women's professional basketball on the court, and the building looked like a Tuesday afternoon practice session. Now, the establishment wants you to believe this is a scheduling anomaly. They want you to believe this is just a bad night, a random dip, something that happens in every professional sports market. But the fans themselves are telling a different story. The conversation circulating among Caitlin Clark's supporters, a fan base that is genuinely unprecedented in the history of this league, is that they are done showing up until the people who run this franchise and this league start protecting their investment. They are done buying tickets while the organization gives away free tires and Bath & Body Works kits just to fill seats. They are done pretending that everything is fine while Alyssa Thomas is putting her hands on Caitlin Clark's throat, and the league hands down a suspension with zero due process, and the Mercury's general manager calls a press conference to defend it. These fans are speaking with their pockets. That is the most powerful language in professional sports, and the people who run this league are not listening. And here is the part that makes this genuinely alarming for the long-term health of the WNBA. Caitlin Clark still showed up. Caitlin Clark still signed autographs. She reunited with Kate Martin on the court, her former college teammate now on the Sparks, and it was a genuinely warm, human moment. She met with fans, she did not sulk, she did not disappear, she did not hide from the cameras. She stood in front of an empty arena and she performed her obligations with the same professionalism she has shown every single time this league has failed to protect her. The building behind her was hollow, the seats were vacant, and she kept signing, she kept smiling, she kept showing up. That contrast, Caitlin Clark present and professional, against a backdrop of empty seats that the franchise's own decisions created, is the most damning image in women's professional basketball right now. And the people responsible for creating that image are not in that arena signing autographs. They are at a podium somewhere, talking about protocol. Now let me get to the statement that broke this story open, because the empty arena is a symptom. What Nate Tibbetts said publicly is the disease. And I want you to hear exactly what the Phoenix Mercury's general manager walked up to a microphone and said in defense of Alyssa Thomas after Thomas's flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark. Don't take my word for it. Here is Nate Tibbetts, on camera, defending Alyssa Thomas's conduct with his own voice.
players or role players. Let's don't base it off veterans or young players.
He said it. Cameras rolling, full press conference. She's a competitor, she's a winner, and she's tough. The one thing she is not is cheap. That is what Nate Tibbetts said about Alyssa Thomas, the player who chokeslammed Angel Reese, the player who put her hands on Caitlin Clark's throat, the player who is directly responsible for Isabel Harrison being out of basketball right now. That is his public defense. She is not cheap. She is not cheap. Let that sentence sit with you for a moment, because the audacity required to walk up to a microphone and say those words with a straight face, after what was caught on video, after what the entire basketball-watching public witnessed with their own eyes, is genuinely breathtaking. And it gets worse, because Nate Tibbetts was not finished. Let me be entirely clear about what Alyssa Thomas's track record actually looks like, because Tibbetts wants you to evaluate this incident in isolation, as if it appeared out of nowhere, as if Thomas has been a model of clean professional play her entire career. That is not the reality. The reality is that Alyssa Thomas has a documented, observable pattern of physicality that crosses the line between competitive toughness and deliberate harm. We saw her put her hands around Angel Reese's throat in a separate incident. We saw what she did to Caitlin Clark in the play that triggered this entire controversy. And according to what has been reported, Isabel Harrison, a professional basketball player who deserves to be on a court right now, is still out of the game as a direct consequence of contact involving Alyssa Thomas. That is not one incident, that is a pattern. And Nate Tibbetts stood at a podium and called her a winner and said she is not cheap. Now I want to be precise about something, because precision matters here. Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever's head coach, is not the primary villain in this story. Stephanie White is actually on the right side of this specific argument. She called out the Thomas incidents. She was vocal about her disappointment. She pushed back publicly. I have genuine respect for Stephanie White's willingness to stand up for her player in this situation. The headline on this video references Stephanie White being embarrassed, and the embarrassment is real, but it is the embarrassment of a coach who is doing the right thing and watching the league she works for respond with indifference and bureaucratic deflection. That is a different kind of embarrassment than being the villain. Stephanie White is not the villain here. The villain is the institutional response. The villain is Nate Tibbetts standing at a podium and defending the indefensible. The villain is a league office that apparently did not call Alyssa Thomas, did not call the Mercury organization, did not conduct what anyone with a functioning brain would describe as a thorough investigation, and then handed down a suspension anyway, as if the process itself was irrelevant. The villain is a front office and a league structure that has spent 2 years riding the commercial wave that Caitlin Clark created and has repeatedly, demonstrably, catastrophically failed to protect the asset that generates that wave, and the fans see it. That is what the empty arena is telling you. The fans see it clearly. Now let's talk about what Tibbetts said about the investigation process, because this is where the statement goes from tone-deaf to genuinely insulting. And I want you to hear the specific line that crossed the line from defensible advocacy into outright absurdity. Here is Nate Tibbetts explaining why he is disappointed in the league's suspension process, specifically his complaint about what the league failed to do before issuing the suspension.
This was not a thorough investigation, in my opinion. The people involved were not questioned at all.
I do think it is important not to rely on social media screenshots. This is a slippery slope. That is a direct quote from the general manager of the Phoenix Mercury. Social media screenshots. He called the evidence, the video evidence, the footage that was broadcast live on national television, the footage that millions of people watched in real time. He called that evidence social media screenshots. We watched it live. Every single person who tuned into that broadcast watched it happen in real time. This was not a grainy cell phone clip posted to a fan account at 2 in the morning. This was a professional basketball game, broadcast on television, with multiple camera angles, with professional production, with slow-motion replays that showed exactly what happened in precise, undeniable detail, and Nate Tibbetts walked up to a microphone and called it social media screenshots. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss what just happened. The general manager of an NBA-adjacent franchise, a man who cited his experience coming from the NBA as a credential for his opinions about investigation process, looked at video evidence of his own player committing a flagrant foul and described that evidence as a slippery slope of social media screenshots. There is no spin to put on that. There is no charitable interpretation of that framing. That is a man who knows exactly what the video shows, who knows exactly what his player did, and who chose to attack the credibility of the evidence rather than address the conduct. And then Nate Tibbetts went further. Because apparently calling live television footage a social media screenshot was not enough. Apparently the statement needed one more layer of deflection, so Tibbetts pivoted to consistency. He said the league needs to be consistent. He said the league should not base its disciplinary decisions on generational talent, on fan base involvement, on whether a player is an all-star or a role player. All of that is fine in the abstract. Consistency in officiating and discipline is a legitimate concern that every serious basketball observer shares. But then Tibbetts said something else. He said the league should not base its decisions on whether a player is a veteran or a young player. And then he said it should not be based on whether a player is white or black. He went there. He introduced race into a conversation about a flagrant foul that was captured on video, reviewed on replay, and punished based on what the footage showed. He introduced race into a conversation where the evidence was a video clip of a black player committing a flagrant foul on another player, and the punishment was issued based on that footage, not on the race of anyone involved. And when you run out of legitimate arguments, when the video is undeniable, when the pattern is documented, when the process produced a result you do not like, apparently the move is to introduce race as a variable and hope that the conversation shifts away from what actually happened on the court. That is not advocacy. That is deflection. That is what you say when you have nowhere else to go. And here is what makes Tibbetts' entire statement so catastrophically damaging, not just for the Mercury, not just for Thomas, but for the broader ecosystem of the WNBA. The league is in a genuinely fragile moment right now. The Caitlin Clark era has delivered something this league has never had before: a mainstream commercial audience, a casual fan base, the kind of viewership numbers that make television executives and sponsors pay attention in ways they never have for women's basketball. That is real. That is documented. That is the foundation on which the next decade of this league's growth either gets built or gets squandered. And the way you squander it, the precise mechanism by which you destroy the goodwill of that new fan base, is exactly what we are watching right now. You let a player get fouled in ways that would not be tolerated in any other professional league. You issue a suspension without what the accused organization considers a thorough process. You let the general manager of the offending team walk up to a microphone and call the video evidence a social media screenshot. And then you watch as the fans, the new fans, the casual fans, the people who bought tickets specifically because Caitlin Clark was playing, decide that their money and their time are better spent somewhere else. That is what the empty seats are. That is the precise mathematical consequence of institutional failure. Every empty seat in that arena is a fan who decided that the people running this league do not deserve their money. And the people running this league are responding by talking about protocol. Now let me tell you about the third piece of this that nobody on television is connecting, because they are too busy treating each of these stories as separate incidents rather than as parts of a single coherent pattern of organizational negligence. The Indiana Fever did not pick up Kate Martin. Kate Martin, Caitlin Clark's former Iowa teammate, one of the most beloved peripheral figures in the entire Clark phenomenon, was available. The Fever passed. Kate Martin is now on the Los Angeles Sparks. And when the Fever played the Sparks in this very game, the game with the empty arena, the game that generated all of this conversation, Clark and Martin reunited on the court, and the moment was warm and genuine, and everything the Fever's marketing department should have been selling to their own fan base all season long. But they do not have Kate Martin. They passed on Kate Martin, and they cannot tell you exactly why, because the honest answer is that the front office decisions that have surrounded Caitlin Clark since she arrived in Indiana have consistently prioritized something other than maximizing the commercial and competitive potential of the most important player this franchise has ever had. Every single decision, from roster construction to the league's failure to protect Clark on the court to the institutional response to the Thomas incident, has communicated the same message to the fan base. We do not fully understand what we have here. We do not fully grasp that the woman in the number 22 jersey is the reason this franchise is relevant, the reason this league is growing, the reason any of these conversations are happening at a national level. We do not get it, and the fans get it. The fans understand it with perfect, brutal clarity. They understand it well enough to stay home. They understand it well enough to look at free tires and Bath & Body Works giveaways and say no. They understand it well enough to send the most undeniable message available to a paying consumer, the empty seat, and hold it until the people making these decisions start making different ones. Here is what I believe happens next, and I want to be specific about these predictions because vague takes are for people who are not willing to commit to an argument. First, the league office is going to be forced to address the optics of that arena, not because they want to, Not because they have suddenly developed a genuine understanding of what the Clark fanbase is communicating, but because the photos are too stark, the contrast is too jarring, and the silence from the commissioner's office is becoming its own story. When the conversation shifts from "look at these empty seats" to "why is the commissioner not talking about these empty seats?" the commissioner talks. That moment is coming. Second, Nate Tibbetts' statement is going to follow him. The social media screenshots line is the kind of quote that gets replayed in every subsequent conversation about this incident. Every time Alyssa Thomas is involved in a physical play for the rest of this season, that quote comes back. Every time a fan complains about inconsistent officiating or discipline, that quote comes back. Tibbetts handed the critics a permanent receipt, and they are going to spend the rest of this season cashing it. Third, Stephanie White's position becomes more complicated by the day. She is coaching a team whose fan base is staging a visible protest. She is coaching a team that has the most commercially significant player in the history of this league and is watching that player's supporters vote with their feet. She is doing the right things. She defended Clark publicly. She pushed back on the Thomas situation. She has been vocal where the league office has been silent. But the structural problems around her are not problems she can solve from the sideline. The roster decisions, the league's disciplinary process, the front office's failure to maximize the Clark era, none of that is in Stephanie White's control. And yet she is the face that is associated with the team's failures because she is the most visible person attached to the Indiana Fever on a daily basis. That is an untenable position, and it is going to become more untenable the longer the institutional problems go unaddressed. Fourth, the Caitlin Clark fanbase is not going away. This is the part that the establishment consistently underestimates. These are not casual observers who stumbled onto women's basketball and will drift away when the novelty fades. These are people who followed Caitlin Clark from Iowa, who watched every game of her college career, who know her story and her style and her competitive identity with genuine depth. They are organized enough to coordinate a visible no-show at a home game. They are vocal enough to force this conversation onto national platforms, and they are patient enough to hold their position until the people making decisions start making different ones. The establishment wants to wait them out. The establishment is going to find out that these fans are better at waiting than they are. And through all of it, through the empty seats and the tone-deaf press conferences and the institutional deflection and the social media screenshots and the failure to pick up Kate Martin and the flagrant fouls and the suspensions without what anyone considers a thorough investigation, Caitlin Clark is still showing up, still signing autographs, still meeting with fans in an arena that the people who run her franchise have not given those fans a reason to fill. Still playing basketball at a level that makes every single one of these institutional failures more embarrassing by contrast because the player is delivering and the structure around her is not. That is the story. Not the win against the Sparks. You are supposed to beat the Sparks. That is not news. The story is the empty arena behind a player who is still signing autographs in it. The story is a general manager calling video evidence a social media screenshot. The story is a league that is sitting on the most significant commercial opportunity in the history of women's professional basketball and responding to the warning signs with protocol and process and deflection. The story is the fans who watched all of that and decided that their empty seat was the clearest possible message they could send. Caitlin Clark is still there, still present, still professional, still the most important player in this league by a margin that is not even close. The question is whether the people around her are going to figure that out before the fans run out of patience entirely.
Reeve and Becky Hammon, the goal is to clean up our game, but I do think it's important not to rely.
Here is your forced choice for the comments, and I want a real answer. Do you believe the Indiana Fever's front office and the WNBA league office are capable of making the structural changes necessary to bring the Clark fanbase back before the damage becomes permanent, or do you believe we have already crossed the point of no return, and the empty seats we saw against the Sparks are the new normal until something fundamental changes at the top? Drop your answer below. Not "it's complicated," not "both sides." Pick one. The Fever fixes this, or the Fever has already broken it. I want to know where you stand. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it is the single most powerful thing you can do to make sure this conversation reaches the people who need to hear it. Subscribe to Sior Torley if you are not already here, and hit that bell notification so you do not miss the next video, because this story is not finished, not by a long shot. We will be here when the next chapter drops. Here is your forced choice for the comments, and I want a real answer. Do you believe the Indiana Fever's front office and the WNBA league office are capable of making the structural changes necessary to bring the Clark fanbase back before the damage becomes permanent, or do you believe we have already crossed the point of no return, and the empty seats we saw against the Sparks are the new normal until something fundamental changes at the top? Drop your answer below. Not "it's complicated," not both sides. Pick one. The Fever fixes this, or the Fever has already broken it. I want to know where you stand. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it is the single most powerful thing you can do to make sure this conversation reaches the people who need to hear it. Subscribe to See or Torley if you are not already here, and hit that bell notification so you do not miss the next video, because this story is not finished, not by a long shot. We will be here when the next chapter drops.
Players or role players. Let's don't base it off veterans or young players.
I do think it's important not to rely on social media screenshots. This is a slippery slope. That is what he said. Social media screenshots. As if what the league reviewed was a blurry cell phone photo somebody posted on X? As if this was not a nationally televised professional basketball game with multiple camera angles broadcast live to an audience of millions. Social media screenshots. The man is describing a flagrant foul that every major sports network replayed dozens of times as if it were a grainy rumor that bubbled up from someone's Instagram story. That is the level of intellectual dishonesty that Nate Tibbetts brought to that podium. That is the argument he chose to make in defense of his player, and what it tells you, what it reveals, ruthlessly and unavoidably, is that there is no legitimate defense available. If the best argument you can construct is that the league was looking at screenshots instead of actual broadcast footage, you have already lost the argument. You are just hoping nobody notices. And here is the thing about that particular deflection that makes it even more insulting. We watched it live. Every single person who follows this league watched it live. It was not a screenshot. It was not a clip that somebody edited for social media. It was a live broadcast of a professional basketball game, and what happened on that court was visible in real time to anyone who was watching. Nate Tibbetts knows that. He was there, and he still chose to stand at a microphone and describe it as a social media screenshot situation. That is the establishment protecting its own. That is the old guard circling the wagons around a player who crossed a line, using procedural language and racial framing and deliberate mischaracterization of the evidence to muddy the water and create just enough confusion that the casual observer might think, well, maybe there are two sides to this story. There are not two sides. The video is the video. Now let me tell you what Stephanie White said, because she is the other named voice in this story, and she is on the right side of it. Nate Tibbetts acknowledged in his own press conference that he respects Stephanie White. He said he got to know her through USA Basketball. He said he respects her as a coach and as a person, and then he dismissed her characterization of the plays as ridiculous. He said Stephanie White calling those plays cheap shots was, in his opinion, ridiculous. Let me be entirely clear. Stephanie White is not wrong. Stephanie White watched what happened to her player, and she called it what it was. She called it cheap. She called it unacceptable. And the fact that Nate Tibbetts, who coached Alyssa Thomas, who knows exactly what Alyssa Thomas is capable of, who has watched her play for years, the fact that he chose to stand there and tell you those were not cheap shots is either a deliberate lie or a breathtaking failure of self-awareness. Either way, it is an insult to Stephanie White, to Caitlin Clark, and to every single fan who watched that game with their own eyes. And here is what makes Stephanie White's position so important in this broader story. She is not just reacting emotionally. She is not just defending her player out of loyalty. She is part of the same referee task force that Nate Tibbetts is on. She is sitting at the same table, working toward the same stated goal of cleaning up the game. And her position, her clear, public, on-record position, is that what Alyssa Thomas did was dirty, that those were cheap shots, that the discipline was warranted. And Nate Tibbetts, her colleague on that task force, looked directly at that position and called it ridiculous. That is the fracture inside the establishment. That is the internal contradiction that the people who run this league are going to have to reckon with. You cannot have coaches on your referee task force publicly contradicting each other about what constitutes a foul, what constitutes a cheap shot, and what constitutes an adequate investigation. You cannot build a credible disciplinary framework on top of that kind of public disagreement. And the fans know it. The fans who stayed home for that Sparks game know it. They are not coming back until the people who run this league demonstrate that they can handle these situations with consistency, clarity, and accountability. Here is the third thing I want you to sit with, because this is the part of the story that nobody on television is going to say out loud. Let's don't base it on generational talent, fan base involvement, all-star level players, or role players. He said it. Nate Tibbetts said it. And I want you to understand what he is actually arguing there, because it sounds reasonable on the surface until you think about it for more than 4 seconds. What Nate Tibbetts is suggesting is that the reason Alyssa Thomas was suspended is because Caitlin Clark is a generational talent with a massive fan base, and that the league disciplined Thomas not because of what she did, but because of who she did it to. He is arguing that the suspension was driven by star power and fan pressure rather than by the merits of the play itself, and then, in the very next breath, he pivots to race. Do you see what he is doing? He is building a framework in which any discipline handed down for a foul on Caitlin Clark can be dismissed as either favoritism toward a popular player or racial bias against a black player. He is constructing a rhetorical escape hatch that makes it impossible to ever hold any player accountable for what they do to Caitlin Clark, without that accountability being reframed as either star worship or racism. That is a deliberate, calculated, cynical, rhetorical strategy. And it is one of the most dishonest things I have watched a coach do at a podium in a very long time. Because here is the reality. If Alyssa Thomas had done to any other player what she did to Caitlin Clark, the conversation would be about the play. Full stop. The play is the issue. The physical conduct is the issue. The pattern of behavior is the issue. And the moment you start arguing that accountability for that conduct is actually about race or star power, you have made it impossible to have an honest conversation about player safety in this league. You have poisoned the well. You have taken a legitimate disciplinary action and tried to turn it into a culture war flashpoint, and the fans see through it. The empty seats at Gainbridge Fieldhouse are proof that the fans see through it. Let me now make some predictions, because I think the trajectory of this situation is actually quite clear if you are willing to look at it honestly. First, the Indiana Fever organization is at a crossroads that they cannot ignore much longer. The fan base has delivered its verdict. Empty seats are not a message you can spin away. You cannot put a press release on top of a photograph of an empty arena 5 minutes before tip-off. The Fever front office is going to have to make a visible, public, credible statement about how they intend to protect Caitlin Clark going forward. Not a hint, not a suggestion, not a carefully worded non-answer at a press conference, but a real, accountable commitment. Because the fans who stayed home are not coming back for anything less than that. They have already demonstrated their willingness to walk away. The organization needs to earn them back, and the clock is running. Second, Nate Tibbetts' press conference is going to age very badly. When you go to a podium and make the arguments he made, the social media screenshots argument, the race argument, the no phone call argument, you are creating a permanent record. You are putting yourself on the wrong side of a very clear situation in a way that is going to be replayed and referenced every single time Alyssa Thomas is involved in another physical incident. And based on her history in this league, there will be another incident. And when that happens, every reporter in the room is going to remember that Nate Tibbetts stood at a podium and told them those plays were not cheap shots. That is a credibility problem that does not go away. Third, the league office is going to face increasing pressure to establish a clear, transparent, publicly articulated standard for how flagrant fouls on Caitlin Clark, and by extension on any player, are investigated and disciplined. The current situation where a one-game suspension can be publicly characterized as the product of a flawed, incomplete investigation by a coach who is simultaneously on the referee task force is not sustainable. That is an institutional contradiction that undermines the entire disciplinary framework. The league is going to have to address it, and the longer they wait, the more the fan base erodes. Fourth, Caitlin Clark herself is going to continue to show up. That is who she is. She showed up for that Sparks game. She signed autographs. She met with fans. She stood in a half-empty arena and gave everything she had to the people who came, because that is her character. She is not going to let the people down. She never has. And that is precisely what makes the institutional failure around her so maddening, because the player is doing everything right and the people who are supposed to protect her keep failing her, over and over in ways that are documented and visible and undeniable. The golden goose is still laying eggs. Caitlin Clark is still showing up. The question, the brutal, unavoidable mathematical question, is whether the Indiana Fever organization and the people who run this league are going to get out of their own way before the fan base decides it has had enough permanently. Because you can recover from a protest. You cannot recover from an exodus. And right now, the people who run this league are one bad decision away from turning a protest into an exodus. The fans spoke. The seats were empty. Caitlin Clark still showed up, still signed, still gave everything she had to this league that keeps letting her down. And Nate Tibbetts stood at a podium and talked about social media screenshots. That is where we are. That is the reality the establishment is sitting in right now. Here is the forced choice I want to leave you with today, and I want you to think carefully before you answer, because both options tell us something important about where this league is headed. Option 1. The Indiana Fever organization and the WNBA league office see what happened at that Sparks game, the empty seats, the fan boycott, the organized withdrawal of support, and they treat it as the wake-up call it is. They make real, visible, accountable changes to how they protect Caitlin Clark. They respond to the fan base with action, not words, and the people who stayed home start coming back. Option 2. The establishment does what the establishment always does. They issue a carefully worded statement. They let the news cycle move on. They hope the photographs of the empty arena get buried under the next controversy. And the fan base, having already demonstrated its willingness to walk away, decides that the organization is not worth their time or their money. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Do you think the Indiana Fever organization is going to respond to what happened at that game with real action? Or are they going to let it slide and hope nobody notices? I want to know what you think, because the conversation in the comments on this one is going to tell us a lot about where the fan base actually stands. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it helps this channel reach the people who need to hear this conversation. Subscribe to Sior Twirly if you are not already here, and make sure you hit the bell so you do not miss the next video, because this story is not over, not even close. We will be right back here the moment the next development drops. This is Sior Twirly. Stay locked in.